Hey, welcome back to another episode of E-commerce on Tap, brought to you by Sourcify and ISBA. I'm your host, Nathan Resnick, joined by my co-host, Aaron Alpeter. Aaron, how's it going today?
I'm doing great, Nathan. How are you doing?
Fantastic. So before we dive into this episode with Pair Eyewear, which is just a fascinating e-commerce brand that's grown tremendously the past few years, for first-time listeners, give a quick kind of deep dive on what E-commerce on Tap is.
Yeah, I had someone explain this to me. That this is the podcast that supply chain nerds have been waiting for. Basically, what we do is we take a well-known D2C company, usually, we tell their founding story, reverse engineer their supply chain, and talk about their exit potential.
There you go. So today we're covering Pair Eyewear. For those that don't know, it's, I think, like a Shark Tank sweetheart company that had a ton of success. They've grown tremendously, raised a lot of capital, and they are a direct-to-consumer eyewear brand. But before we dive into their story, their growth, and their supply chain, let's start with just some tidbits of the week. What caught your eye the past week, Aaron?
Yeah, did you see what was going on with the post office the past couple of weeks in Georgia?
I didn't. What happened?
Well, that's the problem. Not a whole lot happened. So as you know, Louis DeJoy, the Postmaster General, he is trying desperately to modernize the post office. And he's working against a couple hundred years of kind of corruption, I guess if you want to call it that, but just not operational prowess. And so they have this huge CapEx plan they're pushing through. They built a brand new state-of-the-art sorting facility in Georgia. And this facility is just struggling. And so they're completely overwhelmed with volume. There's lots of delays. Workers are just not showing up because they're upset with how the jobs were posted per kind of union tradition or union rules. And as a result, there's a lot of packages that are getting lost. And we're talking about 2 or 3 weeks of packages that's kind of being lost under conveyors or tucked in a corner somewhere and really not moving through. And I guess the silver lining to all this is that their problems are pretty straightforward and solvable. I mean, they're looking at things where, trucks are not being unloaded on time. And so there's just a huge queue that way. Trucks are departing 30% full instead of being completely full. And so there's some basic blocking and tackling from an operational perspective that if they can just get that right, they should be able to have a step change. But these are some really massive growing pains. And Louis Joy, he kind of summed up, and there's this great quote that I saw. He says they have $39 billion worth of mail that cost them $70 billion to deliver it. And so he said, this isn't a monopoly, this is an obligation. And so just for a moment there, I take a step back and, it's easy to complain about the post office. It's easy to complain about these sorts of things, but it is a monumental task taking something that is older than the country and trying to bring it into parity where it can be competitive with some of the majors that are out there.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. I mean, I just think it's interesting to always compare like privatized industries versus government-run type of agencies, if you will. I know there's been a lot of challenges with post offices across the country, and yeah, it's crazy to hear that it's costing 2x the what they're making in mail. It's just insane. What caught my eye is one of our partners at Sourcify, Skoio, is I'm mispronouncing it, but SKIO. They're a subscription app for Shopify brands ran by Keenan Davidson. They passed $10 million in ARR in a profitable manner, which I thought was just amazing. I mean, there's kind of a bit of a crowded ecosystem right now in terms of like apps for subscription for Shopify merchants. And it's just cool to see because on one hand, you have like this dominant player of Recharge. And on the other hand, you have like Stay AI, you have Skoio, you've got, all these other kind of startup oriented competitors that are trying to make it easier for Shopify apps to manage their subscriptions. And I mean, like, I remember if you flash back to our episode with Athletic Greens and how people can go on their subscription page and just so easily manage their AG1 subscription, like they're basically turning that experience into a Shopify app that makes it super easy for merchants. So I just thought it was cool to give a shout out to them and also just, showcase how a lot of the kind of Shopify app ecosystem has grown, right? Because, flashback 10 years ago, most people wouldn't have thought that you can build a, multi 8-figure ARR business in the Shopify app ecosystem. And now there's a lot of companies that have done that. So really cool to see. and just wanted to give them a quick shout out.
But before we get started, I want to ask you a question. How many times do you change your pairs of shoes to go with what you're wearing?
Well, I'm probably a bit different than most people because I'm a bit of a sneakerhead, as you can see from my background. For those listening in on audio only, I've got 9 shoes that I kind of put on a frame in my office, but I think I own a lot more shoes than most. So I don't know. I mean, I don't do it intentionally all the time, but I've got some shoes that I wear every day and some that I don't.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't that long ago when people just had one pair of shoes and they were that was it. You didn't think about that part of your outfit. And now we've gotten to a point where shoes are kind of a fashion statement. You choose your shoes to go with other accessories or just the overall look. And that's really kind of the insight that's getting into Pair. And as you mentioned, they're a direct-to-consumer eyewear brand. And their claim to fame is highly customizable and affordable sunglasses and glasses. And they basically have this platform where they can change the frames to have different styles and different things that can go with your outfit.
Before we dive into, this incredible brand and their growth story, I'm curious, I want to learn the history of eyewear, right? Like, when did people actually start wearing glasses?
Yeah, compared to some of the things that we've looked at, like breastfeeding or shoes or beer drinking, this is a relatively new invention. And we start our story in the year 1000 AD, and that's when the first vision aid, so we're not talking glasses, but the first thing that helped you read, called a reading stone, was invented. And basically what it was a glass hemisphere that was placed on top of ring materials and helped magnify the text. So think of it as like a rock that helped magnify what you're looking at. That was really the first foray into magnification and allowing people to see better. In the late 13th century, so it's late 1200s, the first wearable eyeglasses were developed in Italy. And I think it's interesting because we'll talk about Luxottica and how they're an Italian company. And so there's a little bit of symmetry here where the first wearable eyeglasses came from Italy in the late 13th century. 1452, so before Christopher Columbus sailed, there was an increase in literacy due to the printing press and those sorts of things. So there was lots of demand for glasses. And so you start to see more demand, more designs popping up. In 1730, we had the first pair of spectacles, which went around your ears. So everything else before was kind of held up or was a temporary thing, but these were meant to be worn for the first time. In 1784, our very own Benjamin Franklin invented bifocals. And bifocals basically just means that he has one lens for looking far and another part of the lens that's for looking near. And so you're able to get a pretty large range of vision correction in a single pair of glasses. In the 1820s, 1825, George Airy developed cylindrical lenses that help correct for astigmatism. 1936, Edwin H. Land creates the Polaroid Corporation, and he starts making polarized sunglasses. So this is where you not only get vision correction, but also vision enhancement through that. 1948, we get the first successfully produced plastic contact lenses. So everything else before them was glass. Then we keep going in the 1980s, and this is where we start to see eyewear become more of a fashion accessory. So you see brands like Ray-Ban, Oakley are created in this point in time. The 2000s with an increase in digital screens, whether that be computers or later on smartphones, there is a lot of concern about blue light exposure. And so you start to see blue light filtering glasses becoming popular. And today there's just enormous explosion in eyewear. As we'll get to here in a moment, the overall growth rate of the industry is pretty alarming. It's growing very robustly. And as a result, we see an enormous amount of innovation in materials, technology, and really the focus is on making them comfortable, making them correct your vision better, as well as helping to be a style element.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty crazy to hear the history of eyewear and glasses. I mean, I think what stood out to me is that, before 1730, people basically were like holding their kind of eyewear in their hands instead of putting it around their ears. So that was a pretty amazing invention at the time. I think what's also crazy is that today 1 in 4 children wear glasses. In the future, there's predictions that will be 1 in 2. So 50% of children will wear glasses, which is just crazy. I mean, To me, I think this is a lifestyle change. I think just because people are looking at screens at a much earlier age, that their eyes are needing glasses much sooner. I don't necessarily think it's because we have better, well, we do have better access to care, but I just think it's more of a problem driven by the screen time of children. But I mean, I'm curious to hear your take, Aaron. You've got, you know, 3 kids, and what's your take on this?
Oh yeah, I mean, the number of times that I yell at my kids to put the iPad away from them. My son likes to, I don't know, smell the characters on the screen. It seems like, and he's always way too close. And so I like that at least on the iPhone now. I don't know if you've seen this feature, but it'll actually yell at you if your phone is too close, and it gets me all the time, even too. So even when I'm trying to be conscious about it and trying to vary the distance and change kind of what I'm looking at, I still fall short just out of habit.
Yeah, do you ever wear blue light glasses? I actually have some, but I really like I never wear them. I mean, these are the ones that I have, but I just never wear them. I don't know why.
I've got a pair of Felix Grays that I got a couple years ago that I like, and when I'm really tired, I'll put them on. And so that's usually like a telltale sign with my team is if they see me wearing glasses, they're like, oh, maybe he's cranky because he didn't sleep last night. But I think they're helpful. I probably need to get corrective glasses at some time soon, but yeah, I think the blue light stuff it seems fine. I don't know if it makes a huge impact one way or the other, but it feels fine.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I mean, the eyewear market is huge, right? So it was valued at approximately $183 billion in 2023 and is expected to grow to $323 billion by 2030. And so it's growing at about 8.5% a year, which is just incredible for an industry of this size. I don't I can't think of like a product category that is growing at this size, this quickly. Does anything come to mind on your end?
I mean, nothing legal, right? Like I'm sure that CBD or recreational marijuana has got to have a similar growth rate, but not from that big of a base. I mean, this is truly. I can see why there are so many investors that are very interested in this space, and it seems to be fairly straightforward if you're able to have a unique angle on eyewear to raise a little bit of money, because it seems that there's a rising tide that lifts all boats. This isn't something like baby formula where the birth rate is shrinking. There is an active place here where even a modest player should enjoy close to double-digit growth.
Yeah, I agree. So the eyewear industry is categorized into basically spectacles, sunglasses, and contact lenses. So those are kind of 3 main categories that make up the industry. It's kind of evolved significantly from purely functional, like we originally discussed in the timeline and history, to now a key fashion accessory. So I think more and more brands are geared towards fashion versus function. In North America, the market is well established, right? So there's some major players here. The optical market in the US for 2023 was $65.6 billion. What's crazy to me about this number is, I want the audience actually to guess how many brick and mortar optical retail locations there are in the US. Tweet it out at Aaron and I on Twitter, but it is a staggering number to me. There are 44,850 brick and mortar optical retail locations in the US. To me, that seems a lot. Am I crazy?
No, this is something that, well, it is a lot, but you think about it, this is something that people have to do in person. I know that there are lots of telehealth things that are popping up to help you test your vision and things like that, and they do a decent job, and they can help correct for most sorts of eyesight issues. But by and large, you want to go to somebody who's going to fit you, and you want to be able to see all these stores, and you want to try these glasses on. So this is something that, again, most of the population is going to use at some point in their life, and they want it to be near and convenient. And it's just an enormous market that's supporting an enormous amount of jobs.
Yeah. And so what's unique about the market too is the average volume per person for the eyewear market is 3.7 pieces of eyewear in 2024. So, most people own 3 or 4 pairs of sunglasses or eyewear, which is, pretty unique for the market. And it's dominated by a few major players, right? So everyone, for the most part, has heard of Luxottica, which definitely is the market leader. They have a ton of really famous brands under their umbrella, like Ray-Ban and a few others. I think what stuck out to me is that Warby Parker, which is like a darling child of the e-commerce world. I think most e-commerce operators love Warby Parker and the success that they've had, owns only 2% of the market. I mean, did you think Warby Parker was going to have more of the market share?
I don't really know what I expected, to be honest. It was something where I knew that Luxottica was really big, but I also knew that Warby Parker was not really considered a startup anymore. But yeah, I would have thought that perhaps they were a little bit bigger with all the fanfare. And it just goes to show you how easy it is to be in a bit of a startup bubble where you hear, people who are just like you on X or, at conferences. And even though some of these companies may be household names to us, there's a lot of room for companies like Warby Parker to continue to grow.
Totally. And Warby Parker's thesis was to cut out the middleman and push back on Luxottica's monopoly. I mean, what was Pair's kind of thesis and motivation to get started?
Yeah, great question. So again, Warby Parker started, I think it was 2009, 2010. And so Pair was started in 2017 by Nathan Condamuri and Sophia Edelstein. And other than doing research or working on internships, Pair is like the entirety of their actual work experience. And it's just really interesting that, again, they come back to this idea of they think that glasses should be an accessory that changes with your outfit. That's the real insight. I'd love to kind of just walk through their backgrounds for a moment. And then I've got a couple key questions that I want you to think about. And again, remember, these guys have never had another job other than Pair. When Nathan was in high school, he really won a lot of prizes. He went on nationwide competitions and won competitions in science and math. He decided to go to Stanford, which is where he met Sophia. And he studied mechanical engineering. And really all of his work experience prior to Pair was when he was in high school or when he was at Stanford. And he did have a very interesting and varied work experience. It wasn't the typical Starbucks or working at a Kmart sort of thing. But he did things where for a few months, he was a research assistant at Purdue. For 6 months, he was a research and teaching assistant at MIT. For a few more months, he was a software engineering intern. He was an operations management leadership program person at GE for 3 months. He was associate consultant at Bain for 3 months. He was a product director for a consulting group that Stanford had. And he was a CEO for 2 years at a student-run company called Copernican Solutions, which was providing business solutions to early-stage startups. And so he was named as a 30 under 30. But again, I mean, you add up all of this, and there's really a few years at most in actual work experience, but just the varied amount of things that he was able to do at some very well-known companies is pretty remarkable in its own right.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's had a lot of, different experiences that I'm not, quite sure what led up to Pair in some sense, but I think it really was that thesis of making eyewear more of a fashion statement. What about Sophia? What's her background?
Yeah, so she got a BA in human biology, and her focus was really on healthcare and economics and design. And so she also was a bit of a journeyman and saw a lot of different things. So she was a research assistant at Carnegie Hill Radiology for about a year. She was at Weill Cornell Medicine and spent 2 years as a pharmacology lab research assistant. She spent 1 year as an investment banking summer intern at JPMorgan. She was a research assistant at Stanford University, and then spent another year kind of doing public sector infrastructure investment banking at Goldman Sachs. So another person with not a whole lot of work experience, but really some amazing names on the resume. And whereas Nathan is more geared toward finance and operations, Sophia really is more on the brand creative and marketing side. And so they complement each other there. But the question that I want to ask you that I was thinking through this is, a cynic would look at these two founders as having no real experience. And there are lots of young people who have interesting ambitions or ideas. But if you were a VC and you were hearing their pitch, what would make you want to invest in two really, really young founders that have barely just graduated school?
Yeah, I mean, my honest answer would be probably their network and ties to Stanford, right? There's a lot of incredible companies that have come from Stanford graduates, both young and older, right? So I think they leaned into that. And if I was an investor, I'd probably look at, their network and see kind of their background in that sense. I mean, I think too, there's something to be said about investing in someone that's young, that is kind of ignorant to how hard it is to build a brand, right? And so I think there's power in that as well. That's how I would look at it from an honest take.
I think you're right. I think that the Stanford connection is, it can't be understated. I think most of their investors were Stanford grads, and so there's a little bit of your network paying for itself at that point. But I think that kind of one of the questions I would have as a follow up is when does experience begin to trump passion? You think about this, and there are some founders that we profile that it was really important that they failed a couple times or that they became subject matter experts in a particular area or discipline in order for them to be investable. So do you think there's something around the type of product category and the fact that this was more of a fashion item or that it was initially geared toward kids that opened it up for them to maybe for these investors to maybe take a chance on some unproven founders?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it stemmed from Nathan's kind of experience getting glasses at 8 years old, right? As I did some research here, it was interesting to see. He talked about him being self conscious about his glasses and embarrassed when wearing them to school. And he didn't specifically mention bullying or anything of that nature, but I think most people with young kids worry, if they're wearing glasses, are they getting bullied at school, right? And when they went on Shark Tank and did their presentation, Mark Cuban really, I think, related to this in some sense as well. And so, I think it's an interesting dynamic here because, he probably faced that experience at a young age and wanted to create a glasses and eyewear brand that, was really more of a fashion statement that enabled him to feel comfortable and excited to wear glasses. Nathan and Sophia knew each other starting freshman year at Stanford, right? And Nathan had shared his experience with her, and they met in a club called Design for America, which is kind of neat. And so, both him and Sophia went on to do some research, and they asked 400 different families about their experience with glasses for their kids. And in general, kids hated wearing glasses, right? And parents hated that it was so time consuming and expensive to buy most glasses brands. And so they decided to apply the kind of IDEO's method and design thinking to this, and they knew they needed to find real problems to solve for their customers. And so their initial idea, that is still true today, was to quote unquote revolutionize the product of eyewear to make it something more personalized and self-expressive. And I really think they've hit that home. If you go to their website, you can see just how expressive you can get with their eyewear. I mean, I'm not quite sure if I would call this a quote unquote like revolutionary idea, but I think, the way that Pair Eyewear works, where you can kind of snap on the front of the frames and change the arms, do make them a lot more customizable than pretty much any eyewear brand that I'm aware of.
Yeah, and I think for me, this is where the evolution starts to happen for me. Where yes, they were two smart kids at a well-known school with a good pedigree of generating startups, but you start to see that there were fundamental things that they were doing when they were researching the market that kind of made sense. I think the first insight is that they correctly identified that there really weren't that many, or really any eyewear companies that were geared toward children, at least initially. And so that was the first insight, was like, hey, let's redefine the market and let's be the kids brand. Let's do that first. And then the second thing was just this idea that people would prefer to swap these things out with their outfits based on a particular look or aesthetic that they're going for, but they usually just have one pair of glasses. And so is there a way to make it a little bit easier for them to do that and in the process create something that's customizable? And so I think that, on one hand, it's like, yeah, okay, this makes sense. Of course, it makes sense now. We all live in a world where Pair exists, but in a world where it didn't exist, it is really interesting to kind of think about this idea, and even just to question and have the thought that we're going to allow you to change the color and the design of your glasses by attaching these top frames, or doing these things in such a way that you can swap out your look very inexpensively. And so to test their idea, they started out with 3D printing, and they knew that they were onto something when they started to show people their prototypes, and people were like, oh, this is cool. Where do you get these?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I love that they took a 3D printed approach to prototyping. I think that's, one of the best ways if you can to iterate fast. We tell a lot of our clients at SourceFi to do that if they can and just confirm they've got the right CAD designs that they want and the right layout that they want as well. And I think, I think that's encouraging to hear that people were already asking them, hey, where can I buy these, 3D prototype samples that they created? But, on the other hand, it's a very competitive industry here. And I think, what stood out to me in terms of their founder ethos is they actually were able to reach out and talk to some of their competitors during their whole process of, trying to figure out, should we start Pair Eyewear? And they were able to talk to the head of product of Warby Parker, who had recently left the company. And, Sophia mentions that being a Stanford graduate was really helpful to get this done. And a Stanford email address, as she says, was very powerful, as I can imagine. And they needed to talk to different eyewear experts because they, needed to protect their IP as well, right? So for those that don't know, a lot of glasses and eyewear frames are patented. They have design patents, right? And so they wanted to consult as well with an expert to try to understand, are we going to infringe on any patents if we, come out with this type of design?
Yeah, and what a coup for them to hire their head of product directly from Warby Parker, someone who'd spent the last 5 years building what was at that point in time and today really the darling of the D2C world when it comes to eyewear. I mean, to some extent, they really got lucky on that end, because just think of all the learnings that they could skip, where they knew what to look for in a factory. They knew which factories to talk to. They knew how to frame things, in terms that made sense. And so all of this started to come together for them as they were building the business. And then something pretty spectacular happened to them in 2020. Do you want to talk about Shark Tank?
Yeah. So I saw this when they aired in 2020. They appeared on Shark Tank and got a deal with Mark Cuban. And this, I think, was kind of the first major milestone of growth for them. So it brought a ton of attention to their brand, jump-started their growth, and it kind of fueled that virality that so many e-commerce brands help for. And that enabled them to tell their story directly to families that are watching this, across the world, really. At the time, they only had 4 employees, and the pitch was really focused on kids. But, it attracted 2 of the sharks that they got to deal with. They got $400K for 10% plus a 1.5 or $1.50 royalty that they had to pay until that, $400K was fully repaid. So, I mean, to me, I think Shark Tank in general is worth it for entrepreneurs because of the attention they get. But I'm curious, I mean, we've both worked with different companies that have gone on Shark Tank. What's your take?
For me, it's not as clear cut. I think it is certainly awesome to be on Shark Tank, but I think I've probably worked with or talked to probably 24 different Shark Tank companies that were either on there and didn't get a deal, or were on there and are part of a portfolio, whether it be Mark Cuban's companies or others, and they all kind of say the same thing. The first one is they all complain about how much of a pain in the butt it is from a forecasting point of view, because they don't know when these reruns are going to run. And so it'll be something where they're going along and they have their inventory plan, it works, and then for whatever reason they decide to rerun their episode from 4 years ago, and so they see this massive spike in volume, and they always appreciate that spike in volume. But it can also be frustrating when they're like, hey, we were preparing for this event that we were doing for Target, and now like we're scrambling to fulfill these orders and stuff like that. So that's the first thing that's there. I think the second thing too is that the exposure is certainly helpful, but I don't have any founders that have told me like, what, that was really the difference between us making it and not making it. A lot of times these companies have already been pre-vetted or pre-qualified and are going to be successful in their own right, or they know they're not going to be successful and they just make for good TV. And so I think to some extent it's important to remember that Shark Tank is an amazing show, but it is still entertainment. And there are, lots of other ways to raise money. If you're not in Shark Tank, you're still going to be successful.
Totally. No, that's a good take as well. And I think so. After Shark Tank, Pair Eyewear originally was focused on kids, and they soon expanded to adults. Right, this was kind of a big ask. At first, their team, their investors, a lot of people were reluctant to launch for adults. But in order to convince them, they made a proof of concept and gathered data to show that this was a valuable bet that the company should take, and that really increased confidence for their launch. And so today, what's crazy is that adult is kind of, I think, one of their biggest segments. They have thousands of designs available for, all sorts of different fashion statements that you want to make. But when they launched, they only had 10 frames. And now, they have over 800 frames. I mean, well, one customer owns over 800 frames, which is just crazy to think about. So, you can imagine how many frames that they actually have.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting piece because they have been able to take a page out of companies like Majuri, right, which was one of the first episodes that we did. And they have this concept of limited edition and collectibles. And I think one of the things that was really interesting was they drop new styles. I think it's like every Wednesday. But what they do is for their most important customers, their VIPs, they actually send them a sneak peek on Sundays. And what happens is inevitably one of these VIPs takes a screenshot or forwards the email and says, hey, these things are coming. And they kind of create this new echo chamber of virality that happens every week as new things drop down. So it's this really interesting thing where they've taken something that is basically a commodity, or has been a very expensive purchase that you maybe do once every year, once every 2 years, and they've been able to make it into more of a consumable because for $8, really you can afford to take a chance on something, and if you just wear something one time, most people can splurge on that.
Yeah, to me, I think this was a pretty genius model for them. I think it, increases LTV and probably AOV as well for their customers. And it's not like a straight subscription model in some sense, but it creates that nature of repeat purchases, which is awesome. I think what's cool about Pair Eyewear is they've leaned into licensing as well. I think part of that was probably fueled through their relationship with Shark Tank. But they've done licensing with Marvel, the MLB, NBA, just so many different major brands and sports teams, which is super cool to see. I mean, to me, both those is a genius strategy. I mean, how would you just compare this to other kind of eyewear companies that we've seen as we research the Pair Eyewear story?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think everybody would love to have a subscription eyewear company, and that was really the idea that we had with Hubble and why we got that started. Contact lenses are consumable for the most part. They're a fantastic product there. Glasses are difficult. And I think they've created a synthetic subscription like you were talking about, where their customers have a similar sort of LTV. And it's highly likely that you order pair eyewear glasses and you're going to order frames and you're going to come back at a different interval, but you're going to come back and purchase something more frequently than just going out and buy it. And so you think about this in like a Warby Parker, they have to make all of their money on the $300 sale, the $100 sale that comes through. And that's including all of the costs to get it there. In their case, they're sending glasses and also taking returns back as part of their model. And this is a great way where it is a low enough price point that people are willing to stick with it and try it. And so it's really an ingenious business model from that perspective. We really haven't seen anything quite like it.
Yeah, I agree. And part of that is powered by their invite only Facebook community. So they interact with their customers there, share early designs, get feedback from them. I think that is a key part of Pair Eyewear is the community and also their team, right? I mean, we're talking about a pretty big business here, right? So they have 185 employees and are vertically integrated, as we'll talk about with their supply chain. And, they say as co-CEOs, hiring is a key skill when creating a startup. And so, they typically interviewed each and every employee that joined the company up until recently, which I think is awesome as co-CEOs to do, just to probably align themselves with their team. And I mean, I feel like at that scale, you don't hear about too many CEOs that are still interviewing, every employee like that. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that approach.
The only one that I can hear of that I remember doing that was like Elizabeth Holmes with Theranos. And I just know that from the HBO movie that came out where she was interviewing everybody as they were building a Ponzi scheme. So it is very rare, and I don't know if taking pages from Theranos is exactly what you want to do. It may be an unwelcome comparison, but it is a rare thing for them to look at.
Yeah, yeah. Well, go on their website, for those that are listening, check out how affordable Pair Eyewear is and just the amount of variations you can create here. I mean, they have a very low price point compared to, average eyewear brands, but I think they've done this on purpose to make it very accessible and easy to customize. The company milestones are pretty incredible. They have raised a total of 8 rounds of funding for a total of $149.5 million, almost $150 million raised. So 2018, they raised a pre-seed round of $500K from 3 investors led by Bolt and Everywhere Ventures. They also did a seed round of $1 million with 6 investors. 2019, they did a seed round with 3 investors for an undisclosed sum. 2020 is when they aired on Shark Tank, got that Shark Tank deal. 2021, they raised a Series A for $12 million, led by Javelin Venture Partners, and they also raised a Series B for $60 million, led by NEA, New Enterprise Associates, that year. And between 2020 and 2021, their growth was tremendous. They grew over 10 times year over year during that time period. 2023, they raised a Series C for over $75 million, led by Prism Capital, and Alumni Ventures was in there as well. So, I mean, let's say they raised $75 million. My guess, they probably sold a third or a fourth of their business in that round. So that values them at 200 or so million dollars. I mean, I would estimate their revenue's got to be I would say around 40, maybe 50 million is my guess. I mean, we haven't been able to find exact revenue numbers as we went through this research and try to track down company milestones, but based on their funding, that's where I would think they're at revenue wise. What's your take, Aaron?
Yeah, I agree. That makes a lot of sense to me as well. It is kind of interesting because I think a lot of companies will shout their revenue number from the treetops. They haven't, so it either means that they're extremely well disciplined, or they are maybe don't have as much revenue right now as they're hoping for. But regardless, I mean, they're growing up and to the right. And I think what's really interesting about them is their business model and how they've been able to kind of make a synthetic subscription effectively, just based off of this form factor that didn't exist before. How big do you think a company can get that's just based on the $8 frames?
I mean, it's impressive to see what they've achieved already, right? I think they really do a lot on their website to increase AOV. As I played around with a few different styles and added some items to my cart, it was interesting to see, oh, wow, I'm spending a lot more than I thought I was on Pair Eyewear, right? So I think they do a good job of trying to increase AOV on their website. And, I'm curious to hear about their supply chain here. And let's do our supply chain deep dive here.
Yeah, so one of the things that's interesting about them is they have made the decision to be as vertically integrated as they can. And what this means to them is that they effectively do their assembly or their light manufacturing in-house in Irvine, California. And they have an interesting business model from the perspective of all of their top frames are on demand, as opposed to doing a make-to-stock sort of environment. They've got about a 20,000 square foot facility, and they have looked at this a couple of times, and they claim that the U.S. manufacturing is more affordable than outsourcing it from overseas. Despite that, they're still sourcing a lot of materials and components from Asia, particularly China. You think things like cleaning cloths, pouches, the optical frames, things like that. But one of the things that they point to is when it comes to the actual assembly of the glasses, because they're able to do that here locally, it is a little bit there's still a regulatory burden you have to deal with the FDA, but it is not as burdensome as if you were trying to borrow someone's 510K and import those sorts of things. And so the thought of this made to order versus make to stock, I'm just curious, what if you're advising a company and someone's thinking about setting up a make to order supply chain versus a make to stock supply chain, what are some of the things that are just different inherently?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, from my perspective, I think the way that they're going about it is great because their website incentivizes their customers to be so customized. So made to order to me for this makes a lot of sense. I think it depends on your business model, right? Like made to stock, could be great if you don't have nearly as much customization as Pair does. I think it's interesting to hear as well because part of the reason for their verticalization is they didn't want to get shipments held up by the FDA approval required for sunglasses. And I actually have a personal experience with that. I had a sunglasses brand in college, and the first order of sunglasses that I imported, I didn't realize sunglasses are technically an FDA approved medical device, and your factory has to be FDA certified. And so my shipment got held up at customs, and I had to scramble to get that certificate from my factory. So I agree with their supply chain in terms of how it's set up right now. I think it does make a lot of sense because I've personally faced that. So it's interesting to hear that they're taking this approach.
Yeah, I think it makes sense for right now. I think they're going to find that it's probably going to be a little bit limiting in the future. So, make to order inherently means that your customers have to be okay with waiting a little bit, right? Unless you're building something that can handle an enormous amount of customization for an enormous amount of shipments in a short period of time, meaning that you've got a lot of excess capacity to deal with those peaks and valleys. This is going to be something where it's probably e-commerce only, and it's probably something where people will be willing to wait uh, maybe slightly longer than what they would with a make to stock environment. I think that because there is no true competitor to Pair when it comes to this idea of swapping out different frames on top of their glasses, they can afford to allow people to wait. They can afford to kind of take that cash in before they make something. But as soon as another brand either starts to copy them or another competitor enters, I think that you'll probably see them abandon this make to order uh, paradigm and move to more of a make to stock, at least for their fast movers, knowing that the long tail could always be a specialty order and things like that.
Yeah, and they spend a lot of time on quality and vendor management, right? So, they say that's kind of their pressing need today. At the beginning, it was obviously just manufacturing and setting up this made to order environment. And they produce, a very niche product for the most part. I mean, some people would say sunglasses and eyewear isn't so niche, but if you go to Pair Eyewear, I'm telling you, it's a pretty unique part of the market. And they've recently, kind of taken this more omni-channel approach. They began as just a D2C company, and while e-commerce is still fueling the majority of their sales, I think they are looking for physical retail partnerships to expand, this omni-channel approach that they've started.
Yeah. I think it'll be an interesting piece here. Again, this is a good D2C brand as they think about what they want to be when they grow up. Uh, they're just going to have to rethink their supply chain because the D2C supply chain behaves very differently than a retail supply chain. The economics are completely different. If I remember correctly, you had their head of supply chain on last year in the previous iteration of e-commerce on tap. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I spoke with their head of supply chain, and he really touched on price negotiations being top of mind, and that brought a ton of benefits to their cash flow. I think supply chain is always a balance of cash, and he spoke a lot about that and balancing their cash flow and how they're expanding into retail. So they started 2021. They made their kind of brick and mortar debut, and they partnered with a supermarket chain called Hy-Vee, and now in 2024, they've unveiled a new partnership with the National Vision Inc., the second largest optical retailer in America. And, I think this brand partnership is got a goal of introducing these affordable bundles that Pair offers to people that go to these stores of National Vision Inc.
Cool. Yeah, I know one of the things that stuck out as well is they talked about one of their main metrics they use to measure their supply chain is a click to ship or a click to deliver. I like to call it click to porch. But the idea is that you measure the time from when someone places the order to when it's finally received. And they're looking at all those different milestones there. And so they like this. They talk about how they like this metric because it's relatively easy for everybody to digest. What do you think about this? where do you think that's as helpful? What would you do differently with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense for their supply chain, given that it's made to order. So they're probably tracking their production timelines, how long it takes them to make each product type, how long it takes them to bundle it. I would assume for bundles that take longer, maybe they have some sort of preset setup for that bundle to be done quicker. And I'm sure they've analyzed it to try to understand, how can we get this done faster. I think it's an important metric for them as they really uncover different flaws in their supply chain as they continue to grow.
Yeah, I think that it's a good metric. I agree with you. I think that it's particularly important for their business given that they're make to order and that they're doing their fulfillment themselves. And so typically like on-time fulfillment, those sorts of things are really important if you go to a 3PL because you want to control what the 3PL is responsible for inside the four walls of their facility. And that was part of the reason why we invented Capable. So shameless plug, if anybody wants a free on-demand scorecard that helps track KPIs, just go to capable.com. There's a free Shopify app. But I think that the key thing here is that they are looking at this, and shipping is always going to be something where you're going to try to push that barrier for how much can I slow it down in order to save the most cost. And so if you think about this, and if they are maybe adding a day or two because of the customization, and then they're looking at something with a DHL e-commerce, for example, and it's coming from California and it's going to New York, you start to look at something and we're like, well, if I send it via ground, it could be 7 days just on the ground itself, and then you add in a couple. So are people going to be willing to wait 2 weeks? Probably not. And so you kind of have to play with it and tweak it and just look at your overall profit in relation to that click to porch metric.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I mean, for them too, they use shipping to increase AOV, right? So they offer free shipping for orders over $45. It's at least $6 for orders that are under $45. They have faster shipping options available for additional costs ranging from $15 for priority to $60 for rush. And they ship, in Canada for orders over $100. It's complimentary. It's free. For orders under $100 in Canada, it's additional cost of $25. And they have international shipping as well. So last week, the company announced it would begin to offer its product in the UK and Australia as part of their D2C expansion. So it's pretty cool to see them, expand internationally. I would be curious to learn, where they're shipping those from. Is it from their, existing warehouse? Are they holding some stock in the UK and Australia? What does that look like? And they offer a 30-day return and exchange policy as well. So I think in general, they're doing a strong job with shipping and creating a good customer experience around that. Nothing really stands out here as unordinary. I would say that, they're using shipping as a mechanism to increase AOV, which makes sense in general.
Yeah, and I think as they continue to go international, they're going to have to rethink things. I mean, there's kind of two ways to go international, but well, I guess three in this case. The first one is you just ship internationally, and so the customers outside the U.S. will just wait longer, pay a little bit more, and it's very much of I'm purchasing from a U.S. company, and I know that. The second piece, a tier lower, would be I'm going to put some of my inventory in country or near country, so that it's a little bit faster or a little bit more localized of experience. But in the case of Pair, because of their self-manufacturing, the key thing for them is they're going to have to duplicate that manufacturing if they want to keep with their make-to-order framework. If I'm in Dubai and I have and I'm waiting on a pair of glasses that is produced in California, that is either going to be very expensive for either the customer, Pair, or both, or they're going to wait a long time. And so really what I would encourage Pair to do as they're looking at this and preparing is I wouldn't go international too quickly. I think the most important thing is to be building density around each of these little micro manufacturing facilities that they're going to put together. Almost think of it as like, Starbucks when they're going out and they're figuring out where they're going to put a coffee shop. There's a math or a formula for how many people or how many customers they think they're going to get in a given day or month that justifies making that investment. And so I think that that's probably the way I would approach it if I was advising them, is I'd look at this and say, let's not really rush to the UK or rush to Europe right away. Let's make sure that we have a strong density here in the US. And maybe the first thing we do is we duplicate our manufacturing on the East Coast. So we're able to be a little bit more faster and competitive, but still offering that make to order piece that we want. And then maybe it's like, all right, let's look at what do we think needs to be true before we make that investment in Europe or in Asia, et cetera. Because it is totally possible to expand too quickly. And the complexity of having different regulations, different tax regimes, different entities can really add up quickly and not be worth all the revenue they're getting in.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a really good take. I want to also touch on the sustainability part of Pair Eyewear because I think it's important. They have a partnership with Eye Alliance, which, basically for every pair of glasses purchased, they donate a portion of the purchase to a child in need through this partnership. And so, we've seen this become very common and popular with kind of the buy one, give one model that Tom's Shoes originated. But I do think it's important to mention because they do have a sustainable approach also in their supply chain. They're looking at different production processes to reduce their environmental impact, which is important. I mean, overall, I think Pair Eyewear is pretty impressive. I mean, the global eyewear market is huge. Pair Eyewear is so small compared to, the 183 billion, dollars spent in this market. Do you think they're going to get bought? Do you think they, go public themselves? What do you think their kind of exit strategies look like here?
Yeah, I thought about this, and I think that there's kind of two key questions. The first one is Pair destined to be a popular brand or a disruptive force in the overall industry? And so what do I mean by that? Well, if you look at Luxottica, they control 80% of the global eyewear market, and they have a $105 billion market cap. They're an enormous company. Hoya, the number 2 company, has a $42 billion market cap. Cooper Companies has a $19 billion market cap. Warby, which we talked about earlier, is number 6 with a $2 billion market cap. And so if we think about this as having this thesis that they are changing how people are going to consume eyewear in the future, meaning that these frames are going to be interchangeable and it's going to be more of an accessory, well, then it's something where it's like, okay, they're going to have to be worth several $billion in order to have that outsized effect or to be that disruptive force, or they have to be effectively destroying a lot of value because people are going to say, hey, rather than spending $300 on some Oakleys, I can just spend $60 with Pair, and then I can add $40 worth of different frames, and like I feel like I don't need to go back and change those things. And so there's either going to be some market compression in order for them to be disruptive, or they're going to have to get very, very big in their own right. I don't see them becoming very, very big without kind of going and offering more expensive products there. So that's kind of the first piece that comes to mind, which then the second question is, all right, so if, in my opinion, they're destined to become a very popular brand, what's their exit window look like? And if we just look at Luxottica as the most likely acquirer, just because they typically buy everything, they will typically buy companies in the mid $100 million range. And their stock is trading at about 3.8x revenue or 15x EBITDA. And so if we were to assume similar multiples, Pair would need to be around 50 million in revenue and profitable to justify a $200 million exit. And so if you think about this, given the $75 million that they just raised, that was probably at a valuation that was like that, they are on the beginning of their exit window, and they are going to have something that's truly enormous or is causing a lot of pain to a big acquirer for them to be acquired for significantly more money than the valuation that the last round of investors put in.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. My hot take is Warby Parker is going to acquire them. So we covered Harry's on e-commerce on tap. Harry's has kind of taken this platform approach with e-commerce. They started with men's shaving and grooming, and they've now launched a multitude of different brands. Harry's shares a co-founder of Warby Parker, right? And they have the same co-founder there. And so I think Warby Parker is going to become this kind of platform player and scoop up more and more D2C oriented eyewear brands like Pair Eyewear. So that's my hot take. But we'll see if it happens. But I think this was a really fascinating and interesting episode of E-commerce on Tap, brought to you by Sourcify News. But for those that don't know Pair Eyewear, check them out, paireyewear.com. It really is a pretty fascinating brand. And let Aaron and I know what you think of this episode. And if there is a brand that you want us to cover, give us a shout out. Let us know on Twitter or LinkedIn. We're both very active there. And thank you again for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, share with a friend. We greatly appreciate it.